I woke up that morning to the sound of a ladder scraping against the side of my house. For a second I thought I was dreaming, maybe the wind was just catching a loose gutter. But then I heard a muffled voice, shrill and commanding, as if someone were lecturing the siding. I threw on my hoodie, walked out onto the porch, and there she was. Karen, in full HOA regalia, clipboard, safety vest, and the permanent expression of someone who believed she was ordained by the universe to supervise everyone else's business. Only this time, she wasn't checking lawns or peeking over fences. She had a pair of wire cutters in her hand, aimed straight at my fiber optic line. I froze, equal parts stunned and amused. "Are you seriously about to cut my internet?" I asked, my voice carrying more sarcasm than alarm. She jumped like she'd been caught defusing a bomb. Without missing a beat, she launched into a tirade about how my unauthorized cables were a blight on the neighborhood aesthetic and interfering with HOA-approved landscaping guidelines. I almost laughed, because the cable was buried neatly underground, only surfacing discreetly at the junction box. She wasn't after aesthetics, she was after control. I reached for my phone, partly to record her, partly to call the sheriff if she actually severed the line. But then she made her mistake. She snipped one of the outer casings before I could stop her. Sparks snapped. A faint hum surged through the air, and within seconds my phone rang, an unknown number with a military caller ID. The man on the line didn't even introduce himself before saying, "Sir, we've detected interference with your secure uplink. Please confirm. Has the connection been compromised?" Karen's face drained of color. She'd clearly heard every word. I raised an eyebrow at her. "Congratulations," I said dryly, holding up the phone so she could hear. "You didn't just cut my Wi-Fi. You cut the Pentagon's." She stammered something about misunderstanding and community rights, but I wasn't letting her off that easy. I explained to the officer on the phone that my wife worked as a systems instructor for a federal defense contractor and that our house had been fitted with a secure fiber relay for her remote work. Apparently, when Karen nicked the line, she set off an automated defense alert. I wasn't exaggerating. Before I could finish explaining, I saw a black SUV slow roll into the cul-de-sac. The HOA president came jogging behind, red-faced and panicked, trying to rein Karen back before she ignited a full-on federal incident. But Karen wouldn't be Karen if she didn't double down. She insisted that she, as a board member, had jurisdiction over unsightly cables, and that no government agency could override HOA bylaws. It was like watching a raccoon argue with a motion sensor light. I stood back, hands in my hoodie pocket, calm as a monk, while the SUV door opened. Out stepped a man in a dark suit with an earpiece, scanning the cut wire like it was evidence at a crime scene. Karen, to her credit, tried to bluster her way through, demanding to see his HOA compliance card, as if the Pentagon issued those. He didn't answer. Just took out a tablet, typed in the line code, and confirmed what I already knew. The breach was logged at the Department of Defense. The man looked at me, not her. "We'll need to file a report. Can you identify the individual who tampered with the connection?" I didn't have to say a word. Karen was already flailing her arms, shouting about her rights, about property values, about how the neighborhood couldn't function with rogue installations. The agent just raised an eyebrow, typed something into his tablet, and said into his earpiece, "We've got a live one." Neighbors were peeking out from behind blinds now, phones angled at the scene, recording what was quickly turning into the best HOA meltdown of the year. I let the silence stretch, savoring it. Finally I said, "Yes, that's her. She's been trying to cut my internet line because she thinks HOA rules outrank the Pentagon." The agent gave a clipped nod. Karen's jaw dropped, like she'd just realized that her little power trip had escalated into a national security report. And me? I leaned against the porch rail, watching her unravel, already planning how to play the long game. Because if there's one thing I've learned living under an HOA dictatorship, it's that revenge isn't about shouting louder. It's about letting people hang themselves with their own wire cutters. And today, Karen had just given me more rope than I could have ever asked for. The next morning, I half expected to find Karen chained to my junction box in protest, or maybe staging one of her infamous HOA walks of shame, where she pointed at violations like a mall cop giving out tickets. Instead, the street was oddly quiet. No leaf blower hums, no gossiping neighbors pretending to water their lawns while eavesdropping. I figured she was either plotting in silence or licking her wounds after last night's federal slap on the wrist. Either way, I knew silence with Karen was never peace. It was the pause before another storm. Sure enough, by noon, the HOA president, Gary, came waddling up my driveway with the urgency of a man who hadn't slept. Gary was usually the embodiment of passive-aggressive HOA bureaucracy. Emails in all caps, fines taped to your mailbox, rules enforced selectively depending on who he wanted to impress. But today, his usual smugness was gone. He was sweating through his polo and wringing his hands like a televangelist caught in a lie. "Listen," he started, glancing nervously toward Karen's house. "About last night we need to come to an understanding. The HOA board didn't authorize her to tamper with your line. We're handling it internally." I leaned against my Jeep, arms folded, deliberately casual. "Internally? You mean like the last time she broke into Eleanor's garden shed because she claimed the daisies weren't HOA approved?" Gary grimaced. "Different situation." "No, same Karen," I said, my tone even, almost bored. "The difference is, this time she didn't just cross property lines. She tripped federal alarms. That's not something you can sweep under your HOA rug." He exhaled heavily, then tried bargaining. "What if we waive your lawn inspection fines for the year?" That made me laugh. "Gary, I don't care about your lawn fines. What I care about is that my wife's secure work line nearly got sliced by a woman who thinks bylaws outrank national security. You should care too, unless you enjoy having federal agents parked on your cul-de-sac." Before Gary could respond, a familiar voice rang out from the sidewalk. "He's exaggerating. He's making it sound worse than it is." Karen, red-faced and armed with her clipboard like it was a shield, came marching over. Her hair was wild, her sneakers grass-stained, and her eyes had the manic gleam of someone who'd spent the night convincing herself she was the real victim. "You trespassed," she screeched, pointing her pen at me like it was a dagger. "Those cables were never authorized. You think just because your wife works with government people that you can bring in spy wires and radiation into our neighborhood? The HOA bylaws are clear. Unsightly modifications must be approved by the board." I deadpanned. "Pretty sure the Pentagon doesn't need your signature, Karen." Her face twisted, but she doubled down. "This neighborhood has standards. Property values plummet when residents just install whatever they want. First it's internet lines, next it'll be satellite dishes, then antennas. Before you know it, this whole street looks like a junkyard." Gary groaned, rubbing his temples. "Karen, please." But she cut him off. "No, Gary. This is exactly why we need stronger enforcement. If he won't comply, then the HOA has the authority to restrict his utilities until he learns to follow the rules." That caught my attention. "Restrict my utilities?" She said it with the self-assurance of a dictator handing down a decree, and for the first time I saw where this was really headed. Cutting the line wasn't just a tantrum, it was a test run. If she could get away with it once, she'd try again, this time under the guise of official HOA enforcement. I gave her a slow smile, the kind that tends to irritate people like her more than outright anger. "So let me get this straight. You think the HOA can override federal infrastructure? You're telling me, in front of your president, that you have the authority to shut off my family's access to a secured government line?" Karen didn't even flinch. "Yes. And if you don't like it, you can take it up with the board." Gary looked like he was about to faint. "Karen, stop. For the love of God, stop talking." But she wasn't done. She jabbed her clipboard toward me. "I've already drafted the violation notice. You'll be fined daily until you remove the cable or reroute it through an HOA-approved vendor. If you refuse, the board has the right to hire contractors to remove it at your expense. Now it was my turn to enjoy the silence. Neighbors had started drifting out, lured by the shouting, phones raised and recording. Karen was so busy theatrically waving her clipboard, she hadn't noticed Jake from across the street live-streaming the whole thing. I waited until I saw at least 3 phones pointed at her, then said calmly, "Perfect. Why don't you deliver that violation notice in writing? That way, when I forward it to the Pentagon along with last night's security breach, they'll have a complete record of your jurisdictional confidence." Karen's voice cracked. "You wouldn't dare." I stepped closer, keeping my tone even, unshaken. "Karen, last night a man in a suit with an earpiece had to log your little wire-cutting hobby into a federal report. Do you really think I won't dare to give him the sequel?" For the first time, her mask slipped. Fear flashed across her face, quickly smothered by bluster. "Fine. If you want to escalate this, then don't say I didn't warn you. The board will be meeting tonight to vote on your violation." And with that, she stormed off, nearly tripping on her own sneakers, muttering about bylaws like incantations. Gary just stood there, staring at me like he'd aged 10 years. "She's going to drag all of us into this," he said quietly. "Do you realize what happens if federal agents start investigating the HOA?" I shrugged. "Not my problem." She cut the line, not me. But inside I was already planning. Because I knew Karen wasn't bluffing about that meeting. And if she thought she could use the HOA's flimsy authority to threaten my family's connection, she was about to learn what escalation really looked like. That night, I parked across the street from the clubhouse, watching the parade of board members shuffle in. Karen was first, of course, marching with the swagger of a general. She clutched a folder stuffed with papers, no doubt filled with evidence of my crimes against landscaping aesthetics. Gary lagged behind, shoulders slumped, like a man walking into a funeral. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. Because as they dimmed the lights and started their meeting, I slipped my phone out and hit record. Not on them, but on the military-issued laptop my wife had left me for emergencies. With one keystroke, I activated the secure uplink diagnostic. The screen lit up with alerts. Every tampering attempt, every time Karen had tried to cut, reroute, or file a notice against my line, it was all logged. Timestamp, GPS coordinate, even video feed from the motion sensor at the junction box. By the time that meeting was over, I had a file thick enough to bury Karen in her own paperwork. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just about protecting my internet anymore. This was about ending her reign of terror, once and for all. By the next morning, the neighborhood buzz felt different. The usual gossip about whose hedges were too tall or whose dog barked after 9 was gone. Instead, whispers floated about the Pentagon call and Karen versus the government. I pretended not to notice, sipping my coffee on the porch while the cul-de-sac played its favorite sport, watching each other from behind blinds. Jake from across the street gave me a conspiratorial nod, phone in hand. He'd already posted the video of Karen waving her clipboard at a federal agent. From the comments I skimmed the night before, the internet had christened her Pentagon Karen. I had half a mind to let the mockery burn itself out, but I knew Karen. Public embarrassment was like fuel to her fire. She'd come back twice as loud, twice as determined. The only question was how. That question was answered around noon when I got an official-looking envelope taped to my door. The paper was HOA letterhead, complete with their pretentious gold-embossed seal. Inside was a violation notice signed by Karen herself. The offense: unauthorized federal uplink cables visible and non-compliant with HOA aesthetic standards. The penalty: $500 daily fine until corrective action is taken. At the bottom, she'd scrawled a personal note in pen. "This is your final warning." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. The audacity of trying to find the Pentagon was comedic genius. But behind the comedy was a sharp edge. She wasn't bluffing. She'd weaponized the board's authority and now had me officially targeted. That was her power. She thrived on paperwork and pressure, grinding people down until they gave up. Most neighbors caved rather than fight her. I wasn't most neighbors. I scanned the notice into my wife's laptop and fired off a secure email. Within minutes, I got a reply from the same liaison who'd called me the night of the breach. He thanked me for the evidence and said the Department of Defense's legal team would review the matter. Translation: Karen had just declared war on the wrong bureaucracy. I could have sat back and let the Pentagon bulldoze her, but that felt too easy. Part of me wanted to see her flail, to watch her get tangled in the same web she spun for everyone else. So instead of confronting her immediately, I waited. That afternoon, Gary trudged up my driveway again. He looked worse than yesterday, like he'd aged a decade overnight. She forced the board to vote. He muttered without preamble. 3-2 in her favor. They think they're protecting neighborhood consistency. I tried to argue, but you know how she is. Once she starts quoting the bylaws, people just fold. I raised an eyebrow. And you? I abstained, he admitted, ashamed. But look, if you pay the fines for a few days, maybe it'll cool down. She'll lose interest. Gary, I said evenly, Karen doesn't lose interest. She escalates. That's her entire hobby. As if to prove my point, Karen appeared on the sidewalk like she'd been waiting for her cue. She strutted toward us, clipboard under her arm, lips stretched into a triumphant smirk. I see you've received your notice, she said, voice dripping with satisfaction. Consider this a lesson in respecting community authority. If you don't pay by Friday, we'll have no choice but to involve collection agencies. Gary pinched the bridge of his nose. Karen, maybe we should. No, Gary, she snapped. This is non-negotiable. If he can flaunt federal cables, then what stops Eleanor from painting her shutters neon green? Or Jake from parking an RV on his lawn? Rules are rules. And if he thinks his government friends can intimidate us, he's in for a surprise. I couldn't resist. Funny you mention surprises. Did you know the Pentagon already has your violation notice logged? They were amused, let's say. Something about forwarding it to their legal department. Her smirk faltered for just a second, then returned stronger. Good. Let them try. They'll find that HOA bylaws supersede private installations. This is a community, not a military base. I didn't bother correcting her logic. I wanted her arrogance intact, because arrogance makes people sloppy. That night, as dusk fell, I caught movement near the junction box again. I slipped outside quietly and saw Karen crouched by the line, flashlight in hand. She wasn't cutting this time. She was taking photos, snapping them from every angle like a crime scene investigator. I watched for a moment, then deliberately clicked my phone flashlight on. She whipped around, startled, and glared at me. Documenting evidence, she spat, defensive. This will go to the board and, if necessary, the county utilities department. Perfect, I said smoothly. Because my camera just caught you tampering again, and every photo you take is geotagged. Hope your phone battery holds out when the Pentagon subpoenas it. For once, she had no comeback. She stomped away, muttering under her breath, flashlight beam bouncing wildly. The next morning, the twist came, not from Karen, but from the Pentagon liaison. I woke to an email marked urgent. We've escalated the matter. Due to repeated interference, federal investigators will be contacting your local HOA board directly. Please remain cooperative, but do not engage further with the antagonist. Investigators. That was bigger than I expected. I pictured suits marching into the HOA clubhouse, briefcases full of statutes thicker than any HOA handbook. The thought made me smile into my coffee. Around noon, 2 black sedans rolled into the cul-de-sac. Neighbors poured onto lawns, pretending to garden or check mail, but everyone knew why they were here. The agents walked straight to the clubhouse, where Karen had already gathered the board for an emergency meeting. She must have thought she was about to deliver my head on a platter. I stayed on my porch, watching the circus unfold. From across the street, I could hear her voice rising, animated, defiant. "This is our community. We make the rules here." Then another voice, calm and authoritative, cut her off. Too quiet to catch every word, but I saw her face drain. She pointed wildly toward my house, then back at her clipboard. The agent didn't even glance at me, just took the clipboard, closed it, and slid it into a briefcase. The board trickled out one by one, looking dazed. Gary caught my eye, shook his head slowly, and mouthed, "It's bad." Karen was the last to leave, her swagger gone. She walked stiffly, face pale, muttering to herself like a gambler who'd just lost the house. By evening, word had spread. Karen had been officially served with a federal cease and desist order. Not against me. Against her. She was barred from interfering with or obstructing any federal infrastructure. Which, in plain English, meant she couldn't so much as sneeze near my junction box without risking jail time. I thought that would end it. A rational person would have retreated, maybe even resigned from the board. But Karen wasn't rational. If anything, the humiliation sharpened her desperation. Because at midnight, as I sat on my porch under the quiet hum of crickets, I saw her porch light flicker on. Her silhouette moved frantically through the window, pacing, gesturing, phone pressed to her ear. She was rallying, calling reinforcements, and in that moment, I realized Chapter 2's escalation was nothing compared to what she was about to try next. Karen wasn't done. She was only getting started. At dawn, the cul-de-sac was buzzing like a hornet's nest. Word spread fast, and Karen's late-night phone marathon clearly bore fruit. By 7, unfamiliar cars lined the street. Men in reflective vests unloaded cones and spools of cable from a flatbed truck parked half across my lawn. At first glance, it looked like a legitimate utility crew, but one detail gave them away immediately. The logo stenciled on their van was a cheap vinyl decal peeling at the corners. It read Neighborhood Infrastructure Solutions, which sounded less like a company and more like a scam someone brainstormed over boxed wine. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, deliberately calm. One of the men barked, "Sir, we've been contracted by the HOA to reroute your non-compliant line. We'll need you to step aside." Before I could answer, Karen came power-walking from her porch, clipboard raised like a general leading troop. "Don't let him stall," she shouted. "He'll try to confuse you with government nonsense. Just cut it. HOA rules take precedence." I sipped my coffee and asked the obvious. "Got a work order? Permit? Anything?" The foreman smirked. "The HOA signed off. That's all the authorization we need." At that, I actually laughed. "You do realize the last people who touched this line triggered a Pentagon response, right? Do you really want to be the next case study?" The smirk faltered, but Karen swooped in before doubt could settle. "Don't listen to him. He's bluffing. He wants to scare us with military fairy tales. Cut the line, reroute it underground, and send him the bill." Neighbors clustered on sidewalks, cameras rolling. Jake whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Pretty sure Neighborhood Infrastructure Solutions was just invented this morning." I set my coffee down and pulled out my phone. A single button on the secure app my wife had left me opened a direct liaison channel. Within seconds, a calm voice answered, "We're detecting interference at your location again. Please confirm." I confirmed, loudly enough for the whole street to hear. The foreman stiffened. Karen screeched, "He's lying. He's faking it." But before she could fuel more bravado, 2 black SUVs rounded the corner. The men in suits who stepped out weren't here to ask questions. They were here to shut something down. Karen, of course, doubled down. "You can't override a lawful HOA operation," she bellowed at the agents as if they were trespassing teenagers. "This is a private community. We make the rules here." One agent calmly flashed credentials and said, "Ma'am, this is a federal line. You are obstructing national security infrastructure." The words landed like a hammer. The fake crew immediately began retreating, shoving cones back onto the truck. But Karen planted herself in front of them, arms spread wide. "Don't you dare leave. This neighborhood answers to me, not Washington." The agent tilted his head, as if considering whether she was serious. He tapped something into his tablet, then murmured into his earpiece. Moments later, a sheriff's cruiser pulled in. The deputy stepped out, hat tilted low, and gave me a subtle nod. He wasn't here for me. Karen saw him and shrieked with triumph. "Finally! Someone who enforces local law. Arrest him for unauthorized cables and impersonating federal agents." The deputy stared at her for a long, heavy moment before replying, "Karen, I got a call from the Pentagon. You're about half a step away from obstruction of justice." The crowd gasped. Karen went rigid, then launched into one of her infamous tirades. "Obstruction of justice? This is about weeds and wires. Don't you see? If we let him have unauthorized cables, this whole community crumbles. Our property values, our safety, our—" The deputy raised a hand. "Ma'am, one more word, and I'll have no choice but to take you in." For the first time, Karen's mouth snapped shut. Her chest heaved, nostrils flared, but she said nothing. The fake crew fled in silence, tires squealing as the flatbed rolled away. When the dust settled, the agent approached me, voice quiet enough that only I could hear. "Sir, we've reached a point where further HOA interference can't be treated as ignorance. If this escalates again, criminal charges are inevitable." I nodded. "And if I told you she won't stop?" He gave me a long look. "Then be ready. Because people like her don't back down until consequences are unavoidable." The agents left. The sheriff lingered only long enough to shoot Karen a warning glare. By noon, the cul-de-sac buzzed louder than ever. Phones pinged with neighborhood chat threads. Someone leaked a clip of Karen screaming about Washington being irrelevant. By evening, #Pentagon Karen was trending in 3 states. I thought the humiliation might crush her. Instead, it galvanized her. At midnight, I caught the glow of her laptop through the blinds. She was hammering out emails, dozens of them, to county commissioners, zoning boards, even the local news. She was building an army, not of fake contractors this time, but of bureaucrats who loved red tape as much as she did. The next morning, my prediction came true. A county inspector showed up, clipboard in hand, citing a formal complaint regarding unauthorized utility installations. Behind him stood Karen, grinning ear to ear, arms crossed like she'd summoned the cavalry. I greeted the inspector politely, offering coffee. He declined, already squinting at the junction box. "I'll need to review installation permits and compliance records." Karen piped up before I could answer. "You'll find he has none. This so-called federal line is nothing but a rogue wire threatening community aesthetics and safety. Cite him. Shut it down." I handed the inspector a folder. Inside, copies of the federal authorization documents my wife had provided, complete with seals and signatures that dwarfed anything in the county's jurisdiction. The inspector flipped through them, frown deepening. Karen leaned over his shoulder, desperate. "Forgery. Has to be. Nobody bypasses HOA approval." The inspector cleared his throat. "Ma'am, these are federal authorizations. Out of my jurisdiction. Out of yours too." Her face went scarlet. "So you'll just let him ruin everything? You're as useless as Gary." The inspector packed up his clipboard without another word and left. Karen's scream echoed down the street like a kettle left on boil. That night, Gary knocked on my door again. He looked utterly defeated. "She's calling an emergency HOA meeting. Says she'll motion to suspend your membership and cut all your neighborhood privileges. Pool access, clubhouse, parking permits." I arched a brow. "You realize she's trying to sanction me like a rogue nation, right?" He sighed. "I know. But she has influence. People are scared of her." I smiled thinly. "Then maybe it's time they see what happens when fear goes too far." Because the truth was, I wasn't scared of Karen's sanctions. I was waiting. Let her drag me into a public forum. Let her throw her weight around. The bigger the stage, the harder the fall. And the HOA clubhouse, packed with neighbors, was about to become the perfect theater. When the meeting began, Karen strutted to the podium like a queen ready to crown herself. She slammed a stack of papers onto the table, glaring at me in the front row. Tonight we restore order to our community. This man has undermined our rules, endangered our property values, and flaunted illegal connections. I motion that his membership be suspended effective immediately. The morning after the HOA meeting felt like waking up in the middle of a battlefield after the cannons had stopped. The neighborhood had gone quiet again, but it wasn't peace. It was the stunned silence of people processing the spectacle they'd just witnessed. Karen screaming at the top of her lungs that she was going to take her fight to the state, even the governor, because she alone stood between civilization and the apocalypse of my rogue cable. When I stepped outside with my coffee, I could feel eyes following me from behind curtains. A few neighbors nodded politely, clearly grateful that I'd finally shown someone could stand up to her. Others looked nervous, as if siding with me meant they'd be swept into her wrath. Karen's empire was cracking, but it wasn't gone yet. People like her always had one last play. It didn't take long to see what it was. By mid-afternoon, a Channel 7 News van pulled into the cul-de-sac. A reporter in a bright blazer stepped out, cameraman behind her, and who was there to greet them but Karen, clipboard in hand, looking like a martyr ready to be canonized. She waved them over to her porch, already mid-rant about federal overreach and neighbors terrorized by illegal spy lines. I almost felt sorry for the reporter. She clearly came expecting a puff piece about quirky HOA drama. What she got was Karen foaming at the mouth about national security conspiracies. They're installing surveillance equipment under our noses. Karen cried, pointing at my junction box like it was a nest of rattlesnakes. Our property values are under attack, and I'm the only one willing to stand up for this community. The reporter blinked, glanced at the cameraman, and then cautiously asked, "And you're saying, the Pentagon is personally involved in this?" Karen puffed up. "They called me directly. They threatened me because I dared to enforce our bylaws. But this is America, and no federal agency outranks an HOA's right to protect its residents." I choked on my coffee. Even for Karen, this was Olympic-level delusion. And yet, she said it on camera, smiling like she'd just won an award. That was my cue. I walked over, calm and unhurried, coffee mug still in hand. "Good morning," I said to the reporter. "Would you like to see the actual Pentagon report? Or maybe the footage of Karen blocking federal agents and declaring herself the only law that matters?" Karen spun on me, face flushing crimson. "Lies. He forges documents. He edits videos. He's a criminal undermining this neighborhood's safety." The reporter looked between us, suddenly realizing she'd struck gold. She gestured for the cameraman to keep rolling. I handed her a USB drive with copies of the federal cease and desist order, time-stamped video clips, and the HOA violation notice Karen herself had written demanding I remove the federal line. By the time the reporter wrapped up, Karen was sputtering incoherently, insisting the governor would back her up. She shouted it so loud the whole block could hear. That night, the clip aired on the evening news. And it went viral. The anchor barely kept a straight face while summarizing. A suburban HOA board member claims her authority supersedes the Pentagon's after attempting to cut a federally secured internet line. Neighbors have dubbed her Pentagon Karen. They rolled the footage of her yelling about bylaws outranking Washington, then cut to my calm explanation, finishing with the federal agent confiscating her clipboard. The comments online were merciless. Memes sprouted overnight. Screenshots of Karen, finger raised in fury, were captioned with lines like, "I am the law," and "Forget Congress, we've got HOA." The hashtag Pentagon Karen trended again, this time nationwide. By morning, our quiet cul-de-sac had become a tourist attraction. Strangers drove by just to snap photos of the house with the cable or Karen's lair. Delivery drivers chuckled when dropping packages. Even the mailman muttered, "She's famous now, huh?" as he handed me a stack of letters. Karen, of course, didn't retreat. She doubled down. She set up a folding table on her lawn with a hand-painted sign, "Protect our neighborhood, stop the spy cable." She handed out flyers accusing me of collaborating with the government to monitor everyone's private lives. She even convinced 2 board members to sign a petition demanding a state investigation. But the state didn't bite. Instead, 2 more federal agents returned, this time accompanied by a man in a suit from the state attorney's office. They walked straight past Karen's table while she screamed about tyranny and property values. They came to my door, asked for my cooperation, and quietly explained the situation had crossed into criminal harassment. "Sir," one agent said, "this isn't just an HOA dispute anymore. She's actively interfering with federal operations and attempting to incite others to do the same. We've opened a file. Restraining orders are on the table." I thanked them, signed what they needed, and watched as they calmly served Karen with official paperwork. She ripped it up on the spot, of course, scattering shredded pieces across her lawn like confetti. "Do you think this scares me?" she shrieked. "You can't silence the truth." The crowd of neighbors who'd gathered groaned audibly. Jake filmed the whole thing, of course. That night, another clip went viral. Karen tearing up federal paperwork while screaming about tyranny, set to dramatic music. By now, Karen was infamous far beyond our cul-de-sac. Talk shows mentioned her. A late-night comedian joked, "Some people fight City Hall. Karen fights the Pentagon." Even my cousin 3 states away sent me a link, not realizing it was my neighborhood. The HOA board, meanwhile, was imploding. Gary came to me late one evening, pale and shaking. "Half the board wants to resign. The rest want to expel Karen. She's threatening lawsuits against everyone. She even accused me of conspiring with you because I didn't vote her way. She's out of control." I shrugged. "You built the cage, Gary. She just rattled it until the bars bent." He buried his face in his hands. "I wanted to manage Lawn Heights, not national scandals." But Karen wasn't satisfied with media attention. Her next move was her most reckless yet. She started mailing letters, handwritten manifestos, to local politicians, school boards, even the mayor. Each letter ranted about how federal spies were hiding cables in her community, and how she alone was brave enough to fight them. She signed every letter on behalf of the HOA board, dragging the entire organization into her crusade. That's when the board finally snapped. At the next meeting, they voted unanimously to strip her of her position. Karen, of course, refused to recognize it. She stormed out, shouting that she was the HOA, that she would take her case to the governor, the president, the Supreme Court if necessary. The neighbors had had enough. For the first time, I saw them laugh openly at her. Even Eleanor, who normally avoided confrontation, said loudly, "Karen, you've lost your mind." Karen froze, eyes darting around the room, realizing she no longer had the crowd. She slammed the door behind her and stormed off into the night. I thought maybe, just maybe, that would be the end. But the next morning, a new twist arrived. The morning the reinforced line went live, the cul-de-sac looked more like a military checkpoint than a suburban street. A temporary tent covered the junction box, guarded by 2 men in polos that screamed, "Federal contractor," even without visible insignia. They weren't armed, at least not openly, but their posture said they didn't need to be. The neighborhood kids pedaled slower than usual, gawking at the tent, while parents pretended to water their lawns just to spy. Karen's blinds hadn't closed all night. Every neighbor swore they'd seen her silhouette pacing back and forth until dawn. I knew the silence wouldn't last. Sure enough, at precisely 9 a.m., her front door banged open like a shotgun blast. She emerged in full battle regalia, visor, cap, clipboard, a sash she must have bought from a novelty store that read, "HOA Enforcer." She looked like she was leading a parade, except the only ones following were her 2 cats, darting back inside as if even they didn't want to be associated with her. She marched straight across the street and planted herself in front of the contractors. "Excuse me," she said in the tone of someone who'd practiced it in a mirror, "but you are trespassing. This is private HOA property. You do not have approval to install your," she sneered the word, "spy tent." The taller contractor barely glanced at her. "Ma'am, please step back." Her nostrils flared. "Step back? I'm the only one here with legitimate authority. You can't just override an HOA's jurisdiction. Do you even have a work order?" Without a word, the contractor tapped his tablet, turned it around, and showed her the screen. I couldn't see it from my porch, but the way Karen recoiled told me enough. Federal seals have a way of shutting people up. For normal people, at least. Karen, of course, wasn't normal. She straightened, lifted her clipboard, and announced for the whole neighborhood to hear, "This is not over. If the board won't act, then I will. You can't shove wires into the ground without community oversight. I will take this to the highest office in the state." The shorter contractor sighed audibly, muttered into his earpiece, and the two went back to work. Karen stood there sputtering, trying to rally neighbors who deliberately avoided eye contact. When she realized no one was backing her, she stormed back inside, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. That night, her counterattack began. I woke around midnight to the faint sound of typing echoing across the cul-de-sac. Karen's blinds glowed blue, her silhouette hunched over a laptop. She wasn't just writing emails, she was drafting a manifesto. By morning, copies of it had been slipped into every mailbox on the street. The document was 6 pages long, written in bold font, peppered with underlines and exclamation points. It read like a conspiracy blog married an HOA newsletter. She accused me of being a federal plant, the contractors of being surveillance operatives, and even suggested the reinforced line was secretly designed to spy on everyone's smart fridges and baby monitors. Her conclusion? She demanded all residents join her in filing a class action lawsuit against both me and the Pentagon. Half the neighborhood laughed. The other half looked terrified. That was her gift, making people feel like saying no meant they'd be targeted next. Gary came to my porch that afternoon, paper in hand, his face pale. "She's lost it completely. But some people are scared enough to sign. They think if they don't, she'll start fining them for phantom violations." I leaned back in my chair. "Let her. The more rope she pulls, the faster she hangs herself." He rubbed his temples. "You don't understand. She's already sent copies to the county office, the state utility board, and, get this, the governor's office." I almost spit out my coffee. "The governor?" Gary nodded miserably. "She's demanding an emergency injunction against the Pentagon's presence here. Claims we're under occupation." I let that sit in the air for a moment, savoring the absurdity. Karen, self-appointed general of the HOA, declaring war on the United States government. If it weren't my street, I'd have paid for front-row tickets. 2 days later, her gamble bore fruit, though not in the way she hoped. A sleek black helicopter buzzed over the cul-de-sac at dawn, landing in the soccer field behind the subdivision. Out stepped not the governor, but a state security liaison escorted by federal agents. Neighbors spilled out of their homes, filming on their phones, kids screaming with delight at the sight of a real helicopter. Karen, of course, charged down the street like she'd summoned them personally. "Finally!" she cried, arms raised. "I've been demanding intervention for weeks. Shut down his illegal operation immediately." The liaison didn't even look at her. He walked past, shook my hand firmly, and said, "Sir, we're here to ensure compliance and reinforce your security measures. Washington authorized additional oversight." Karen's screech could have shattered glass. "No. No. You're supposed to shut him down, not help him." The liaison gave her a look usually reserved for barking dogs. "Ma'am, your behavior is now part of a formal case file. Continued interference could result in state charges." Her face went white, then purple. "You can't charge me for protecting my community." "Watch us," the liaison said flatly. Neighbors laughed out loud, some clapping. Jake caught the entire exchange on camera. Within hours, the clip hit social media. The caption read, "Karen calls the governor, gets the Pentagon instead." It went viral overnight. That evening, while the contractors expanded their work zone, Karen's house went dark. No porch light, no pacing silhouette. For the first time in weeks, she was quiet. But it wasn't surrender. It was the coiled silence of someone planning something reckless. At 3 in the morning, motion sensors outside my house lit up. I checked the feed on my phone and saw her crouched by the reinforced line, flashlight between her teeth, bolt cutters in hand. She looked like a burglar in a bad sitcom. I stepped onto the porch and cleared my throat. "Midnight gardening, Karen?" She spun, eyes wild. "This is my last chance. Once I cut this, the HOA regains control." Before I could answer, the floodlights around the tent snapped on. The contractors had installed motion alarms. Within seconds, a siren wailed, not neighborhood loud but military loud, rattling windows. Neighbors stumbled onto their porches in pajamas, filming the scene. 2 black SUVs screeched around the corner. Agents jumped out, and in less than 30 seconds, Karen was caught, bolt cutters dangling uselessly in her hand. She shrieked about bylaws, about property values, about being the last line of defense. The agent leading the team simply said, "Ma'am, you're under arrest for attempted sabotage of federal infrastructure." The words hung in the air like fireworks. Neighbors gasped. Jake muttered, "She's really going to jail." Karen kicked, screamed, swore she'd sue everyone in the room, even the Pentagon itself. But they cuffed her, read her rights, and loaded her into the SUV while the siren finally died down. As the convoy drove away, silence settled again. Then, slowly, applause broke out. Eleanor clapped first, then Jake, then the entire cul-de-sac. People laughed, cheered, some even hugged. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt free. Gary approached me, looking both relieved and hollow. "I guess that's the end of her." The neighborhood had been unnervingly calm for a week after Karen's arrest. No rants echoing across the cul-de-sac, no flyers tucked into mailboxes, no midnight flashlight beams bobbing across lawns. People started to relax in ways I hadn't seen in years. Neighbors hosted impromptu barbecues, kids chalked the sidewalks, and even Gary looked like he'd lost 100 pounds of stress. But I knew better. Karen wasn't gone. Karen was regrouping. On the 8th day, my suspicion was confirmed. A glossy envelope appeared in every mailbox, postmarked from the county jail. Inside was a typed letter, formatted like an official newsletter, titled Karen's Call to Arms. She called herself a political prisoner, framed her arrest as a federal conspiracy to silence the only voice brave enough to stand up for neighborhood values, and urged us all to protest on her behalf. She'd even attached a schedule: when to call the governor's office, when to picket outside the courthouse, and when to boycott non-compliant neighbors. My name and address were bolded at the bottom like I was public enemy number 1. Most neighbors laughed it off. Jake read it aloud on his porch in a dramatic voice, and Eleanor fed it straight into her shredder. But some people looked uneasy, worried about what she might stir up once she got out. I wasn't worried about if. I was worried about how. 2 weeks later, the how arrived. Karen returned not humbled, but emboldened. Her mugshot had already become a meme, yet she strutted back into the neighborhood like a war hero, holding her head high, waving at people who deliberately turned their backs. "They couldn't keep me down," she shouted. "The truth can't be silenced." She wore a t-shirt emblazoned with the words, HOA General, as if prison time had only upgraded her rank. That evening, she called a community town hall at the clubhouse. Most of us went out of morbid curiosity, not support. I sat in the back, arms folded, watching as she unveiled her new master plan. "They think they can scare us with federal agents and paperwork," she bellowed, pacing like a televangelist. "But we are the people. We are the community. And no government agency, no so-called secure line, can strip us of our rights." That is why, effective immediately, I am forming the Neighborhood Liberation Council. Gasps, groans, and a few chuckles rippled through the room. She unfurled a banner with the acronym NLC painted in red and blue. It looked like a high school art project. Her plan was outrageous even by her standard. She demanded neighbors refuse to pay HOA dues unless the board reinstated her. She promised to liberate us from surveillance by organizing nightly patrols to monitor federal activities. And most dangerously, she revealed she'd contacted a fringe radio host who'd agreed to air her story statewide. "You've seen the headlines," she cried, veins standing out on her neck. "They mock me as Pentagon Karen, but I wear it proudly. If Washington wants a war, then they'll get one. And we, the true homeowners, will be the front line." The room erupted, but not in support. People booed. Eleanor shouted, "Sit down, Karen." Jake yelled, "You're trending for all the wrong reasons, lady." Even Gary, normally spineless, slammed his gavel and declared her out of order. Karen's eyes blazed as she realized she was losing the room. And that's when she dropped her biggest twist yet. "If you won't fight," she snarled, pointing straight at me, "then I will. Tomorrow night, I will personally shut down that illegal spy cable once and for all. And anyone with courage will join me." The room went silent. She had just threatened, on record, to sabotage federal infrastructure again. Gary paled. Jake's phone, already recording, caught every word. By the next morning, the clip was viral. News outlets replayed it nonstop. Pentagon Karen declares war on federal line. Analysts debated whether she was dangerous or just delusional. The Pentagon liaison called me personally. "Sir, thank you for providing the footage. We'll be ready." I knew what ready meant. That night, the cul-de-sac transformed into a stage. Neighbors lined sidewalks, phones raised, waiting for the showdown. Cars parked at odd angles. Kids perched on bikes. The air buzzed with anticipation, like the hour before fireworks. At exactly midnight, Karen emerged. She wore combat boots, camouflage pants, and a reflective vest. She carried bolt cutters in one hand, a bullhorn in the other. Behind her, a pitiful handful of neighbors she'd guilt-tripped into joining shuffled along, looking terrified. She raised the bullhorn and shouted, "Tonight we reclaim our neighborhood." She marched toward the tent over the junction box. The crowd gasped as floodlights snapped on. Black SUVs rolled into position. Agents stepped out, calm, collected, flanking the tent. The sheriff's cruiser pulled up behind them. It was a full blockade. Karen froze for half a second, but her pride shoved her forward. She lifted the bolt cutters, screaming, "Bylaws over Washington." That was it. Agents moved in. They didn't tackle her. They didn't need to. They simply surrounded her, reading her rights again, as her so-called followers melted into the crowd. She thrashed, screamed, even tried to bite one of them. Neighbors booed. Jake shouted, "See you on TikTok, Karen." Someone else yelled, "You're going viral again." As they dragged her toward the SUV, she locked eyes with me. "This isn't over," she shrieked. "I'll fight this all the way to the Supreme Court. You'll see." The door slammed. The convoy rolled away. Silence fell, broken only by laughter and applause. People hugged, cheered, clapped me on the back. Eleanor raised a glass of wine and toasted, "To the end of Karen." But I didn't cheer. Not yet. Because I knew Karen. Even as the street celebrated, I remembered the words she spat at me that first night. "No government agency can override HOA bylaws." That wasn't a threat, it was a worldview. Jail wouldn't kill it. Memes wouldn't kill it. Not even national ridicule would kill it. And I realized something then. Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was a case study. A warning about what happens when petty power festers unchecked. Still, as I stood on my porch, watching neighbors reclaim their peace, I allowed myself a smile. Because for now, at least for tonight, the cable hummed quietly, the street was calm, and the HOA tyrant had been hauled off in handcuffs again. Jake walked over, phone still streaming. "You think this is finally the end?" I took a slow sip of coffee, eyes on the dark road where the convoy disappeared. With Karen? There's never an end. Only sequels. The crowd laughed, but I wasn't joking. Somewhere in a holding cell, I knew she was already planning her comeback, scribbling manifestos on napkins, dreaming of bylaws and power. And when she returned, because she always would, I'd be here. Calm, ready, and waiting with the long game. Because the one thing Karen never understood was that her battles were about control. Mine were about patience. And in a war between noise and silence, silence always wins in the end.